Hello and welcome to this week. We are already in week 4, unit 3. For this week you'll be working on solving equations and also with line. So I'm going to give you a little mini lecture on the inequalities. Hopefully this will help guide you through the week. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me so we can work on it. So what we're going to be looking at, like I said, we're going to start talking about inequalities. And so when you look at an inequality, it's going to be looking pretty similar to an equation. The only difference is that now instead of an equal sign, you're going to have an inequality. Therefore, it's called inequality. So what are the inequalities? It's either going to be this guy over here, which means less than. You're going to have this one right here, which means less than or equal to. And notice the difference. Although it has the same inequality, it has that line at the bottom, which is the equal sign, so less than or equal to. Sorry for the handwriting, I'm trying to get better at it. The other option is going to be greater than, or greater than and equal to. So these are the options that we may have. So when you have an inequality, it might look something like 2x plus 7 greater than 5. See, it looks very similar to an equation, but now instead of having an equation, an equal sign, we're going to have an inequality. So that's what it is. And when we get to solve it, which we're going to do later on, we are going to solve it just like if it was an equation. So the thing with inequalities is that you can graph them. You know, when you graph an equation, it's just a point. But when you graph an inequality, you have to do it on a number line, and it's gonna have however is it that it looks. So it might look something like this, and we're gonna go in depth with this later on. So when you have something like this, you can write it either using something that is called a set notation. And so when you talk about set notation, you're talking about notation that it looks something like wiggly stuff x such that x is greater than a, for example, and you close with a wiggly stuff. So every time we have sets, we're always going to put those wiggly stuff. And then the other option that we may have is using the interval notation, which we're also going to be looking at soon. So the interval notation, when you look at interval notation, you're either going to use parentheses or you're going to use brackets. Now the question is, when do you use parentheses and when do you use brackets? Well, we're going to use parentheses every time we have a strict inequality, just like less than or greater than, but we're going to use the brackets when we have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So one way I used to remember this is like, well, if it has a line in the bottom, then that means I want something that has a line in the bottom. And so that's how I remember and these things. So now let's look at the interval notation and in a graph. So let's see how it looks. So if we come here, I already put some inequalities there. There inequalities almost in set notation. I'm just missing the x such that x. But if we look in here, in the first case, we have a is less than x less than b. So basically what I'm saying is the number that I want is in between a and b, but I am not including a or I'm not including b. So when I graph it, it's going to look like an empty circle, because that empty circle means that it's not included. And I think I did not mention it here, but I will mention it now. So when it's not included, we're going to do an open circle. When it is included, we're going to do a full circle. So we're going to do that in here. So since A is not included, we do an open circle. And if B is not included, we do an open circle. And like I said before, we take things that are in the middle, so therefore we need to color in the middle. So we're going to color everything in the middle. Now if we were to write this in interval notation, I know that my starting point is A, my ending point is B, and again, since A is not included, I'm going to use parentheses. B is not included, I am using parentheses. And so that's how you write it in interval notation. And that's how the graph should look like. Now let's say that we're going to be looking now at this case right here. Now what we have in here is that the number is between A and B, but now I am including A and I am including B. So if the A was 1 and the B was 7, then that means that my number could be any number between 1 and 7, including 1. So that means it can be 1 and also it can be 7. So when I graph it again, my starting point is going to be A and my ending point is going to be B. So I'm just going to color everything in between. And now I need to decide if I want to make it open or I want to make it close. Well, I can see it's less than or equal, so that means it's going to be close, and this guy also is going to be close. And so if I write it in interval notation, it's going to be A, which is my starting point, B, which is my ending point, and then again I have this line, so I'm going to be using brackets because they're included. They have something in the bottom. I want something that has a line in the bottom. Let's do now this case right here, when we have that the number is between A and B. I am including A. I'm not including A, but I am including B. So again, if A was 1 and B was 7, then that means that my number can be any number between 1 and 7, and it can be 7, but not 1. That's all it means. So again, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to take 1, and I know I'm taking things that are in the middle between A and B. So now I'm going to explore what I want. So A is not included, therefore I'm going to have a open circle. But then when I go to the B, I know B is included, so I'm going to make it a closed circle. And when I come here, I'm going to put A. I'm also going to do B. And so this is closed. And this is this is the A is open and the B is closed. So I use parentheses and bracket. Now I'm gonna come here, and again I have the number between A and B. A is included but B is not, so I'm gonna make a closed circle for the A, and I'm gonna make an open circle for the B, and I'm gonna color everything in the middle. And so if I'm gonna write that as an interval notation, my starting point is A, ending point is B. A is included, therefore I'm going to use a bracket, but then since B is not, I'm using parentheses. Now, the ones that are coming out, they're a little bit different, but not so different after all. The only difference is that now we're going to go A, that's where we're starting, and we're not including it, and we're just going to go to the right, and we are not stopping. This is a trip with no stop. So we're going to just keep going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny. So we just keep going and going and going, and we end up at an arrow, which means that we're going to keep going all the way to infinity. So when we write this in interval notation, we're going to start at A. And where are we going to finish? We're going to finish at infinity. Now, I know A is open, so I'm going to have a parenthesis. But when I look at infinity, well, you cannot tell me where infinity stops. I don't know when it stops or when it begins. Therefore, every time you have infinity or negative infinity, we are always going to use parentheses. And so when we come to the next one, we have exactly the same thing. The A now is included. So I'm going to put that closed circle, and then I'm going to go color to the right everything, and when I color, my last point is an arrow, therefore my first point is going to be A, my last point is going to be infinity. So when I come here, A is included, but I don't know why we lost it. A is included and infinity is not, so I use parentheses because I always use parentheses when I have infinity. Now when we come to this case right here, now we have the B. So that means that B is where I am. I'm gonna leave it with an empty spot, but then I'm moving this way. So this means that I'm starting at the arrow, which means that I'm gonna go from negative infinity, and again every time I have infinity or negative infinity I use parentheses, and I'm gonna finish at B. And since it's open, I'm using parentheses. In the other case, same thing, I'm starting at B, but now my circle is full and I'm moving in this direction. So when I do, I go from negative infinity, because that's my starting point, to B. So I go parentheses here and brackets there. And last but not least, on these inequalities you have where it says all real numbers, which means that you're gonna color absolutely everything from that number line. And so my starting point is gonna be negative infinity, my ending point is gonna be infinity. And like I told you before, whenever you have infinity or negative infinity, we always use parentheses because we don't know where it stops. So I still have a couple of minutes, so in these minutes I'm going to show you how to solve some basic equations. And so, like I told you before, when you solve an inequality, it's just like solving an equation. You're going to solve it just like you solve a normal equation. But now the difference is that you have to keep in mind that when you have your solution, so in this case I have x is greater than negative 2, I need to graph it. So I have an idea, so I know negative 2 is around here, and when I graph it, it's going to be open, moving this way, and so I can write it as a interval notation, and it will look something like negative 2 to infinity with parentheses on both sides. So the other thing that you need to remember, besides once you're done your solution set, you write it as an interval notation, and it's good to graph it so you can write that, is that every time you divide or multiply by a negative number, you always need to switch the inequality. So let's look at this example. So again, I'm going to solve it just like if I was solving an equation, exactly the same. So negative 3 on both sides. So you have negative 2x is less than or equal to 2. When you divide by negative 2, that's emergency, 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 emergency. We need to switch that guy. And so you end up with x is greater than or equal to negative 1. So when you graph it, there is your negative 1. It's going to be included, and we're going to be moving on to this side. Therefore, if I were to write it in interval notation, it will look something like negative 1 to infinity, including 1, not including infinity. So that's basically how you solve an equation. I still have like one more minute, so I could probably be able to solve something like number 3. So to solve number 3, just like an equation, but this time it's like you're gonna ignore one side and then you're gonna do it in everything. So I know that in order to solve an equation that doesn't have that negative 5 or less than, I add 2, but now I have to add it to every single side. So when I do, then I have negative 3 is less than 3x less than 3. And then just like before, I will divide by 3, so I'm going to divide by 3 absolutely everything. And so when I do, I have negative 1 is less than x less than 1. And so to graph this, my number is in the middle of negative 1 and 1. Is open. I color in the middle, and if I were to write it in interval notation, it will go from negative 1 to 1, parentheses on both sides. So that's pretty much it. I looked at the inequalities. Hope this helped, and have a nice week.